everyone. Lauren from Lawtrades here. We are a tech-enabled workforce of legal professionals that drive value, efficiency, and flexibility really to busy in-house legal teams. We frequently host these conversations. For those who are new to the community, welcome. For those who are returning, thank you for being a continued part of the conversation. We really, really do appreciate it. So top of mind topic today, something that I think we should examine outside the confines of March when we're hyper-focused on women's history and women's rights, challenging the gender pay gap in legal. What does that actually look like? So joining me today, I have two fantastic women who are advocates in the space. We have Maureen Frangopoulos, who is a senior legal director at Uber, and Karla Pinckes, who is the senior director of corporate legal and securities at Viavi Systems and a member of Sun Law Group, which you can speak volumes to. They're a wonderful organization. So I'd love to kind of kick things off casually, having each of you give a little bit more background. So Maureen, why don't you give us an intro on yourself?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for hosting us today, Lauren. And so glad to be talking about this topic. It's near and dear to my heart, and I know as well as Karla, my panelist. So my name's Maureen Frangopoulos. I've been at Uber for about 7 years, which in the tech world, for those that know, is really a lifetime. It feels like 20 or 30 years. I've been at Uber a long time. Before Uber, I was at a variety of mid to larger size firms in the Chicago area. A litigator by trade, have always been in litigation. Although when you join a startup and when you're involved in tech, you kind of become a jack of all trades. So I've been involved in regulatory, safety, product advice, variety of those types of things. But am a litigator by trade, and I lead our safety and insurance litigation team at Uber. But most importantly, I manage about 65 legal professionals. So really, I see myself as their chief advocate is my main role at this point in my career, and their development is a big part of what I do. So excited to talk about this topic, super important, and I'll hand it over to Karla.
Yeah, I would just echo your remarks in terms of the importance to normalize and continue having conversation outside of, the March cycle. I started my career about 20 years ago in litigation, and slowly moved into in-house about 16 years ago. So I worked for a leadership development company as their senior corporate counsel, the Kim Blanchard companies, for about a decade, then moved to WD-40 doing publicly traded company support work as their AGC for about 5 years, moved to a startup and became a GC of a blockchains companies. And now I'm back in corporate filing support, most notably leading an ESG initiative for a 100-year-old company that rebranded in 15. So, but for me, a passion point is really my work with Sun Law. It's an in-house association of about 700 women lawyers, predominantly located in California. We just opened an office virtually in London, as well as on the board of directors of Girls Inc. It's a 50-year-old nationwide nonprofit that works with teenage girls who are underrepresented, and based on the demographics of the city, will then determine really who your girls are. But it's STEM-based research, helping them be brave, bold, and healthy. And so I'm really happy to be here and be a thought partner, and really welcome the audience to ask questions and really be part of the dialogue today, because I think we really want to hear from all of you. Pain points, passion points, let's make this really interactive.
Yeah, and tactical in nature. We want you guys to have those takeaways. So you are both advocates. Obviously, you have teams. You work with many women in the legal space. When or what has your experience been more broadly, or when can you take a step back and kind of understanding the gender pay gap? I'd love to hear a little bit more context on what your experience has been more broadly. Was there an inflection point when you kind of realized that there is a difference here, or and when did that happen in your career, Maureen?
Yeah, I can take that first. So I think, to be honest, right out of law school and right as I started my career, as I mentioned, I'm a litigator, but I'm also a tort litigator. It is very much a little boys club, especially when you look at the area that I litigated in. I'm from the Chicagoland area, recently moved back to Ohio, where I'm from originally, but started my career in Chicago. And so many probably have similar experiences, but oftentimes where I'd walk into the courtroom and my appearance would be commented on. I remember one time at a court in Southern Illinois, I was in a pantsuit and told I can come back when this was by the judiciary, when I was in a skirt suit. Different experiences like that have happened in law firm life, just, going through the experiences where I've had to advocate for myself. I think law is an area where there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Not that other fields don't have this, but an area in particular relative to compensation where I had to advocate for myself, where I didn't feel like I was being paid equally to those at my level in my field, and did go down that path for myself. And so one of the things that in experiencing these things as a young lawyer, one of the things I definitely wanted to do when I got a chance to manage, and that was soon after I joined Uber, is definitely make it a priority to make it different for those who were coming, after me or with me, so to speak. And I have a young daughter as well. So it's one of those things that comes to mind when I think about advocating for her and the next generation, that if she goes down this path and ends up a lawyer, that things are a little bit different for her, not just for pay, but when she walks into a courtroom or to a deposition and someone presumes, she's the court reporter, which is always what happens to us. Not that there's anything wrong, very worthy profession on the court reporter side, but I did, put myself through law school and kind of want that credibility factor of, people not presuming when I walk into a room that I'm one thing compared to the next. And so I think those are the things that we're up against, and pay certainly at the top. And so thinking about my daughter, thinking about my team, which is primarily female, thinking about how we make it different for them is really what drives me in this space.
Absolutely. And Karla, you've been you're tenured in the industry, and I'm sure, that the landscape has changed immensely, but there's tons of work. What did that look like for you? And what has your experience been?
I think it lends itself to personal experience, where you have an event that, compromises your sense of credibility and integrity. In an interview, I have so many stories, but, things that bubble to the top that just are ridiculous. Being asked in an interview after I was newly married, what my child plans were. Completely illegal question, right? But sometimes law firms are the worst at abiding by employment laws when they're supposed to be advocates of those laws, to, at times really trying to advocate for higher pay, a promotion, and the conversation becomes almost painful. It's like my contribution is so on its face evident based on goal achievement and or what we articulated were objective measures to determine success. Why is this such a difficult conversation? And yet I would look at mediocre performance by a male colleague who was then getting that promotion and or pay raise and to me in an easier flow. And so what I've experienced, and certainly in many conversations with Sun Law members and other colleagues, the higher a female achieves success, I believe and have experienced, the harder they are graded, so to speak, from a performance standpoint. Johnny just has a little easier road because Johnny golfs with executive management every week or whatever. Jill has to work a lot harder. And also too, if Jill makes a mistake or there's a learning moment, I believe female executives are just graded harder than a male, because I've personally experienced it. I've had an April Fool's joke played on me one time by the senior most male leader of the EMEA trading bloc. Would that have ever happened to a male counterpart? No chance. And in terms of accountability, very little. So for me, to your point, Maureen, it's like, I have a daughter. I also have a son, and I'm a big advocate of meritocracy. And until we see first woman X, it's just, it's really complementing the skill set for that promotion or that, new employment designation. There's just work to do. Right. And so needless to say, I do that for, and I do think in the 20 years I've been in law, I've definitely seen improvement, but we've had some recent real slingbacks, so to speak, and we have work to do. So
yeah.
It's crazy and sad, Karla, as you share those stories, just thinking, I have the same experiences in the past, 5 to 10 years, even as interviewing for jobs that I didn't get, where they asked about how easy could I travel? How if I was a newly married individual at that time, and similar child aspects came up, and that was, I think, tying to the travel question, didn't end up getting that job. I mean, it's crazy how it's not, we're in different parts of the country, and it's happening everywhere, and it's happening as recent. I mean, that was within the past decade of having those experiences. And something that you talked about in terms of having to perform better and to have that what I call the credibility factor of the extra credibility that we have to show and that we have to document. And that came up in Law Firm Life when I knew I wasn't being paid equally to what others were being paid. And I did like a 20-page memo that I left on my then partner's desk, kind of documenting this is why I deserve a raise. And I ended up getting what I asked for, but also sad that I had to ask in that way and that I had to substantiate it with a 20-page memo compared to why, my work should speak for itself, and it had spoken for itself. Ultimately, they gave me what I asked for, kind of recognizing that, right? But they wouldn't have done it without me pushing for it and documenting the reasons why. And I think that's, it's something that when I talk to people and mentor them, that I say, go about it that way and making sure that you can document and make your case. But it's also sad that we have to sit here and be making our case instead of just, having equality in the profession, which is disheartening.
I mean, one thing that I would say as one success strategy, it won't eliminate the unconscious bias that we all deal with, but it can help mitigate it, is really get clear with your managing, attorney or whatever your reporting structure is. What does an A look like? And I even did this at a prior role. We articulated the A, and I still had to argue at the end of my performance cycle, and I still didn't get the A, even though we had identified objective criteria of what an A looked like. But nonetheless, try to establish what are the goals for the fiscal year, what is the rubric of what I'm being graded on, to try to take out any ambiguity as much as you can, but you still have subjective unconscious bias. Jill is seen as bossy. Jack is seen as competent and a leader. And so I think there's a question in terms of, we need to be doing more to educate, get more allies. I think conversations like this, where we also invite other, champions of diversity, that would include, not just women, I think is a success strategy. Try to create and normalize these conversations in your own organizations, but also to be the face of change. Like Maureen, you were alluding to, I really try to lead by example. I mean, I use LinkedIn, and, there's some professional, personal branding risk to some degree because you're putting yourself out there. But I would say the more we can not be afraid and have support, like Maureen, your people looking to you for support, to feel like they are heard, and you being an advocate for them within your organization, that's how we create change.
Yeah. And Maureen,
I was in a courtroom, it was federal court. I was 9 months pregnant. My due date was the next day, and I was arguing a motion, and I looked like a penguin. I wore the, two suits because you don't want to buy a bunch of, different outfits when you're pregnant. And there wasn't another female litigator in the entire courtroom. But the judge, defense counsel, prosecution, I was, representing material witnesses. So in that example, if I, having a conversation with my coach, put your shoulders back, know your value, know that we know you're the most competent, credible resource for our client in that moment. And that's where that coaching as a leader is so important too, to help, kind of mitigate those waters.
That's right. Yeah. And Maureen, I'd love to hear more about the traction under Tony West's leadership at Uber, because I know there's been fantastic strides there. And that's obviously trickled down to you and your legal team. How did you get there? I'd love for you to give a little bit more color to that, because I think those are tactical things that maybe people could start to implement, if we're talking about allies and doing more to educate our organizations and building that culture. Do you speak to that for us?
Yeah, I think definitely from an organizational perspective. So Tony West is our chief legal officer, and he joined Uber in late 2017. I often tell people I've been through, all the iterations of Uber. Now I'm in a much better stage than where we had been. I've definitely grown with the company through Uber 1.0, 2.0, 2.5, whatever we're in now. But I do know that Tony joining the company had a huge influence on, I think, improving the cultural values in the company. D&I is super important to Tony. Equity is super important to Tony. And so one of the things that he and Tammy Albaroun, who joined him shortly after, his deputy general counsel, really advocated for was an audit and an analysis on equal pay initiatives. And I give him so much credit for this because it can be a scary thing. What do you find? What do you have to do? But organizations should be thinking about this. And I'm glad that Uber has definitely been a leader in this space. And so we underwent a large audit in 2018. And as of 2020, we're definitely able to say that every female was making dollar for dollar, but also from an underrepresented population, because I think I can definitely speak to the female component of this, but there's also a big conversation around underrepresented populations and how this impacts them as well. And so we're also able to say dollar for dollar equality on that point. But I definitely, being under his leadership and seeing his focus on DE&I and the equity part being so important has been really inspirational for me and how I think about, leading my own team as well. And within the CLO, he's done other things. He's gone through and looked at what everybody was making and making sure that at a minimum, everybody was at the median in terms of there was nobody falling below that median, doing different initiatives from a pay aspect. And like I said, these types of conversations can make organizations uncomfortable, right? Are you inviting a lawsuit? Are you, increasing your costs because you're going to be, you're going to have to make adjustments from a pay aspect. And especially in the type of era that we're in now, it can be hard, for organizations to want to go down that path. So I think it takes a lot of courage. And I think, especially making that one of the top initiatives when he joined the company, if that was the first thing I'm going to focus on, that's rare. That type of leadership is rare. And so when I think about what keeps me going in Uber land and, what's my inspiration and who do I have to look for as a leader, I think he's done a great job in helping shape the company and getting us to a more equitable place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I see some questions, a question in the audience from someone, trying to understand if they're being paid equally or not. And I think this goes back to, how would you, Karla, set up a platform or a conversation to be open for people to feel comfortable in coming to you? Are you setting up regular check-ins with your legal staff? What is that? What tactical takeaways or, practical advice can people, in a leadership role kind of take to make sure that their more junior associates feel comfortable and confident in those conversations?
Well, let me even kind of peel the onion back even more. I see a question, if, as a law student, kind of just now entering the market, things I would ask is, and also evaluate what's the maturation of the entity. If it's a startup, more likely than not, leadership is not going to be that developed. I'll just use that word. It's not as developed. As such, there may be less likely of a framework of objective compensation methodology process and policy. Mm-hmm. So, that is a data point, so kind of look at the maturation of the entity read Glassdoor. Who's on is it publicly traded? Who's on the board? Start to look at who are the people. So not just process and policy, who are the people and the key players within that entity, board level, C-suite level. And then, third, in the interview process, start to ask questions. What is the organization's compensation philosophy? What's my career progression path? Because if you're in a startup, it might be a team of one. There may not be career progression. So just knowing that as you're going into that opportunity, so you have your eyes wide open, you can make an informed decision. Number two, what is your performance process? Right. So is it a quarterly, like an annual, we set goals? So in addition to your job description, what are the annual goals? Did we have alignment and discussion on the front end of the performance cycle? Then bake those goals down into digestible quarterly subsets of the goal, meeting quarterly to say, am I on track? So just get a real sense of what the performance evaluation process looks like. I think, and then for me as a leader, I would have quarterly check-ins, I would have one-on-ones. And so if your manager's not setting those one-on-ones with you, set them, be such as what I say, situational self-leader, set one-on-ones yourself and get the time with your leader, and always ask questions like, influence up. How am I tracking on my goals? So if you're not getting the leadership style that you believe is going to optimize success to ensure you will obtain success at the end of that performance evaluation cycle, then ask and put time to ensure that you have the time to check in. And then if I'm off track, in what way are you seeing I'm off track? Because at the end of the cycle, what we don't want is to be surprised, well, you didn't achieve it. Well, that should have been addressed in quarter one. Maybe the goal was no longer relevant. Maybe COVID happened and now I can't achieve that goal. Things, the world just continues to be very dynamic. So make sure your goals are still, relevant to the actual work that you're doing. But as the leader, at times also having frank conversation, give an honest answer, but be there to be their coach, help them try to get that A. And if you're seeing a delta, what am I doing as a leader to help them get the A? Is it a lack of organizational skills, maybe on a global contract management role, whatever? Maybe I offer some project management skills for that individual, agile thinking, like whatever it. And then at the end of the day, if that individual is can't do or won't do, that's a different conversation. But nonetheless, I think as a leader, your responsibility is to really do what you can to help your people get that A.
Yeah. And
one thing, just building upon any tips as you're entering the job market, I would definitely, D&I can be buzzwords these days. Equity can be a buzzword. Law firms, and I shouldn't target law firms, but I think for the most part, it's at the top of where law students are looking in terms of careers. They know that D&I is a hot topic as well, right? And so I think there's going to be certain firms that really are prioritizing it, and other firms that just know, like I said, it's a buzzword and it's something that people are looking for. And that's not just from a looking for a job aspect. It's also when you think about an in-house role and I have to hire outside counsel, right? So I think you definitely need to be prepared, as Karla mentioned, to ask some of the other questions. At what point should I be targeting a promotion? Ask that during your interview. If I've been here 3 years and I haven't been promoted, if I've been here 5 years and haven't been promoted, is that bad? What should I be looking for in terms of growth? Who's in the C-suite, as Karla mentioned, who's leading that organization? If it's a law firm, who's your managing partner, and who's on your board? Who are the people that are ultimately running this firm, and are any of them women? Are any of them underrepresented minorities? Thinking about those types of things and not being scared to ask those questions. In the interview process, law firms, especially big law, especially, should be equipped to answer those things. If they're not, it's a red flag, and I'd be looking elsewhere. But I wouldn't hesitate. You don't want to get into a situation where you've accepted something and within 6 months you're looking again. So, making sure that you're thinking about those things, and not just, I think sometimes people can make the quick grab for, oh, this gives me, immediate financial security, or this is a top law firm said so-and-so, and I've got to grab that. I would dig a little bit deeper as you're in this interview process and thinking about these things, so that you do end up in the right spot, and somewhere in particular that will focus on your development. So somewhere that's going to get you to that next level and get to your next goal, and help you achieve where you want to go from a career perspective.
Right. What about negotiation tactics more broadly? Whether it's somebody just coming out of law school, or somebody who's, reaching for that next promotion or that next tier, how transparent are we being in numbers? What resources do folks have? Obviously there's legislation in California, for example, that there's transparency, but it's still a range. So how thoughtful can people be, or what could they have in their arsenal when they want to really be thoughtful about their negotiation tactics and getting what they want and deserve?
One thing I love this question. A friend of mine, sometimes don't answer the question asked. Provide the answer that you're comfortable providing. So sometimes when they say, what's the number? I always say, well, what's your range? Because I want to benchmark based on what, it's almost like who's going to put the chess piece first. Yeah. Then I can articulate, in my own mind, is the range even in my range? Because I also too, based on the opportunity, maybe sometimes because the equity piece lends itself, or maybe the development piece lends itself, maybe you take a little less space, but I think, try to get a sense, and in some states it's illegal to actually ask, but yeah, you still see in LinkedIn online and job apps all the time, what's the number? But so I always counter like, well, what's your range? And then, can have a conversation from that point. But I also think, depending on the maturation of the entity, it really, I think, and you said this too, like with startup tech companies, the likelihood of them having really objective compensation tiers is probably pretty small. And so I think that it does lend itself to a lot of subjectivity and in terms of being able to negotiate. But I think the more you can extrapolate where their number is, I think that is a good first move, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think understanding, I mean, my parents are in their late 70s. I came from an upbringing where it was, don't discuss your pay, right? That's how my parents' generation was. We don't talk about numbers. We don't put that. And really at the end of the day, what that does is it leads to inequity. It's, it wasn't polite conversation. And I love my parents more than anything, but it wasn't polite conversation, right? And so you don't talk religion, you don't talk politics, and you don't talk money. I think that's changing. And I think the generation, even I'm an elder millennial, but even the generation after me and younger millennials, I think are talking about it more. And so I think organizations need to be aware of that, because if not for any other reason, that you could face legal issues, right? So the more that people talk, and regardless of whether it makes companies uncomfortable or managers uncomfortable, it is happening. And so people will talk. And I think the more that they can be transparent and get ahead of the issues, whether it's in the interview process and you're being more transparent about what the pay range is, or even once people are at companies and being transparent about what levels make, because that can tend to be very closed. I think the world is changing. I think the generation, especially like I said, coming after me, is helping to change it. And so what's obvious is there's going to be more conversation around it. There's going to be more talking about it. And so I think from an organizational perspective, the more transparency, the better. Because this is the way that the world is going, and people want to be paid what they're worth, regardless of gender, quite frankly. I think the conversation is just headed in that direction. I actually just saw a company, and I can't remember what it was, but it was on LinkedIn, that said they're actually taking negotiations away from opening offers and just being very transparent at the beginning of the process. Here's the number. This is the number for everybody. Here's what it is. And I think that comes with its own, there's not going to be a one size fits all approach to this. I think that could come with its own issues depending on how you're approaching something. But what I like is that there's a company out there thinking about this, right? Thinking that could be a step to improving equity and changing the conversation. And so I think it has to be something from an organizational perspective, from a law firm perspective, that is part of the conversation. And you're going to probably be forced into it at some point. Like you mentioned, there's certain laws that materialize. Colorado has a law on transparency in compensation. And so this is the way that the world is going. And I think that's exciting. And when we think about at least what can we be optimistic about, I think this is one of those things. But hopefully that helps, answer the questions in terms of the job market and the right things to be asking.
Right.
Yeah, there was a question, I think, about your GC, Maureen, and how what a great influencer, change agent, leader, and another comment about, well, what if my GC is in essence, there's a challenge, if you will, with like historic thinking. Can you change that person's mind? Typically can you change their mind? And I think one factor, because I've had a lot of, experience dealing with some of these organizational challenges. In what way is this CEO and or COO setting the tone? Because if they are not on board with meritocracy authentically, your GC is going to have a really challenging time to
Yeah.
prioritize gender-related issues and focus.
Yeah.
And so is it an organizational challenge, or is it a personality challenge or style challenge with your actual GC? And, at times it may come to, think of some recent leaders who are not people first, whether you're male or female, demanding people coming back in the office and frankly could care less about their people. So, think about the ultimate leader and that brand. And sometimes you may just have to look outside the organization because you just keep running up against a wall, and it just may not be the place for you. And that's okay sometimes as well, as kind of knowing when to throw the flag and look outside.
Well, yeah, and I think that's the takeaway for organizations, right? If you're not thinking about this, you will have attrition, which also, if you don't think about anything else, comes at a cost, right? And so I think in terms of let's be optimistic about your GC and hope that there is a path to changing their mindset. I think one thing you can do is even say, hey, I attended this podcast, or I attended this panel and they talked about this interesting thing. I was thinking about, could we talk about incorporating some level of X, Y, and Z, and just see how they respond. And if it's an absolute no, I would never consider that, this may not be the place for you. I say that with the understanding that job markets are tough and you got to also still land somewhere else where you're happy and where you can financially provide and things like that. But I think there's little ways that you can introduce the conversation. If you want to really go deep into the issue, I'm a lover of storytelling. I'm a lover of presentations. You could put together some really deep data and analysis on why certain things matter, whether it's from a pay equity aspect or a D&I aspect. The data is very clear out there that the more diverse your team is, the better your organizational health will be. Lots of research in this area. And so if you really wanted to go down, a deeper analysis, I always say invite, a presentation that you can offer up to them. But I think you can try to introduce things in a subtle way, if that would be better for your approach, and say, hey, I just read this article, or I just heard so-and-so speak on this topic. I thought it was neat. Could we talk about that? But I think to Karla's point, especially, DE&I has to start at the top. It's got to start at the top and it's got to trickle down. If you don't have an executive team, if you don't have, a C-suite, if you don't have senior leadership that cares about these things, your middle level management and your, employees are going to struggle to be able to incorporate those things just because they won't have the resources, they won't have, the commitment and the energy behind it to really do meaningful work. So I think you've really got to look at, do you have a C-suite? Do you have a managing partner? Are they talking about these types of things, and not just talking, but then demonstrating action? They're actually, you've seen changes being implemented as a result of that task force they launched, or whatever it might be. Because like I said, I do think DE&I is a buzzword these days. And so I think you have to really parse out who's doing meaningful, real work. Like I said, the audit that we underwent and the analysis that we put out in terms of dollar for dollar, who's actually doing meaningful work in this space and who's just talking the talk, because I think both of those things exist out there right now.
Yeah, and one good thing too, from an external factor aspect, is you have dynamics like 2020 women on boards, and in the SEC world, human capital management, e.g. DE&I, lives and is expected to be reported on in your ESG report. And Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, writes a very influential letter every year, and he's made it very clear, we are all about growth. We are all about social capitalism and and for those organizations that really authentically tie their ESG into business objectives to innovate, to create value, are the companies that we're going to invest in. And the SEC is going to be coming up with a rule change later this fall, where it's not just number of employees and offices the number of offices you have to disclose. It's what is your demographic makeup, male versus female, cultural or ethnic. And so organizations are going to have to start reporting this information out. That's your report card. So for organizations that have not been recruiting, promoting, developing, and retaining talent that really demonstrates, a diversity meritocracy mindset, it may impact an investment decision. That might be, 2-3 years out, but nonetheless, these changes are coming.
Yep. So changes in leadership are shifting, the landscape is shifting, and the talent on the back end is shifting and changing too, right? So they're, as Gen Zs kind of move into the world, and they are, they are woke, and they're involved, and so how is leadership and management style going to have to shift and change, even though that may come before an organization actually changes itself.
Right.
It really has an opportunity to do so. What are some practical takeaways for folks?
So that's interesting, because I don't think it changes. Like I said, as much as I see my main role now as chief advocate, and I would, whether I've got a boomer underneath me or I've got a Gen Z, right? So I don't think it necessarily changes in terms of what our role is. I think your role is to advocate for and develop your team. But I think you have to be aware of the shifting tide and be aware as a leader, especially if you have different demographics from an age perspective and different generations. I do on my team.
Yeah.
And what works best for those individuals, what their expectations are compared to what you can deliver. But like I said, at the end of the day, I more than advising on, a complex legal issue, and we've got plenty of them. My role, I really see, is as chief advocate. And so there's a variety of things I'm thinking about when I say that. Development is top of mind, and that goes beyond pay. But I think, at the end of the day, understanding, as we've talked about, that this generation expects a conversation around these things, and expects, I think, oftentimes they can get pegged as, well, they just don't want to work, or they expect anything and everything. And I don't think that's true. That's not, millennials got pegged with that too. And as an elder millennial, I can relate to that. It's not that there's not this expectation of wanting to work hard. They absolutely want to work hard, but they want to be treated fairly. And they're going to talk about it in a way that previous generations didn't. And I give a lot of credit to that. Like I said, I grew up in a mindset where I was definitely taught not to challenge some of these issues, and to follow the rules and follow the expectations, right? And to do like those before me did. And so I've had to shift my perspective and get more comfortable with, no, I'm going to challenge this. There's a right way and a wrong way to challenge it, but I'm going to do what I can to shift it. And I think that's the expectation, is they want to have the conversation. They want to know that they're being treated fairly. And so our role as leaders is to help advance those initiatives for them.
Yeah, I would just add, if you're in a leadership role, just optimize fair standards. Mm-hmm. So you treat everyone the same. You're meeting weekly, same amount of time with each team member. You as leadership is an inside job first, and you don't get to leadership island, put your umbrella in the sand and kick your feet up. I mean, as a leader, you have to continue to evaluate and enhance your own skill set to mitigate unconscious bias, be an influencer, et cetera. But I think the more the team can see fair standards, or if team member A is having an issue with team member B, I am a big, don't triangulate. Have you two had a conversation? Mm-hmm. So the more you can, and also, have team members share in leadership. Every team meeting, maybe have someone else take the leadership role, set the agenda, and it creates, kind of that store owner accountability. Mm-hmm. We all have an ownership and leadership role on the team. We're not just looking to one person. I think that also can help create a sense of a we, not a me. And I think that's really important to mitigate a feeling of unfairness. And frankly, from an employment standpoint, when people feel like they've been treated unfairly, that's when you get lawsuits. Mm-hmm. So leadership it's not just a nice to have because the SEC and investors, it also helps mitigate employment risk. It often, and I was looking, and I know Maureen was, neighbor A is mad at neighbor B about the fence and sues because maybe neighbor B didn't bring the bottle of wine, as much as neighbor A did. I mean, it's always about emotion. Yeah. And so if you can, standardize to some degree as much as you can, and optimize that level of fairness, and we all have a stake in this together mentality, I think is a really effective strategy to, optimize everyone feeling like they have a voice and a seat at the table.
Right. And I think these organizations that you're both a part of, Sun Law and the likes, having real conversations even outside of your existing workplace, do they speak volumes to you guys?
What do you mean?
Like being able to sit at Sun Law, like a group of women, and being able to have candid conversations with folks that are just in the industry outside of your particular organization, to kind of seek that guidance as well if you're having a challenging.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think conversations like today, benchmarking, feeling safe not only within your own team but external, professional associations that you're a part of.
Yeah.
And I think this is where in-house really has a unique role, because oftentimes you decide budget and there's a lot of power in that decision. Who are your third-party partners? Whether it's a translation services company, like whatever your partner is, how are they demonstrating that they're really authentically leaning into meritocracy? Or is it a just check the box? And, Sun Law, some of our, the members have worked for some of these law firms. So they have an innate knowledge of really what's happening at some of these firms. So when I'm in that budget influence role, I don't spend money at those firms. And so I think it's also, being an influencer, I love that your use of the word, an advocate, Maureen, but really standing in your own power and being the champion for the people that you lead, and seeing in what way you can optimize their success, I think is really important too.
Yeah, especially in litigation. I mean, obviously hiring outside firms is a big part of what I do. And so when we undergo that analysis, and we don't do it lightly, if you send me a ping or an email saying, how do I get Uber business? I'm never going to respond right away and say, oh, you're the friend of so-and-so, you're on. That's not how we operate. There are companies that operate like that, right? And I think when we start talking about the male dynamic, it operates like that pretty extensively. Friend of friend is, easier to get on board, easier to hire that person. I know when I had to market in law firm life, and I was rarely brought on marketing trips, and rarely offered that opportunity. But when I was, easily things happened male to male, where it was, this is a friend of a friend, can you send a file type of thing. We don't approach it that way. I have a whole task force dedicated to that, to the point that even if it is, law school buddies of mine, and I have several that are on our outside panel list, they had to go down the same process. And that process, there's a variety of things that we do, but part of that analysis is, what is your firm doing for DE&I? And digging deep there, not that it's, oh, you brought so-and-so to this lunch to showcase, her to me, but is this person also going to be working the files? Do they get a percentage of the kickback in terms of, being able to work on our work? And so thinking about it, as being able to influence this area, and maybe going back even to the individual who, wanted to approach her GC or wanted to kind of strike up a conversation about these things. You might still have little pockets of opportunity where you can advance these types of things, even if you can't change your own organization. Maybe if you are still able to hire outside counsel and you can prioritize who you hire and making sure that they focus on DE&I, you can still make an impact in this area, even if you might not necessarily be able to change your GC's mindset or whatever it might be. There might be small pockets of opportunity that you can still make an impact there, for others, so to speak. So that is one of the things that's super important to me. Like I said, we have a whole task force on my team that's dedicated to this area, and a big part of what we look for.
Awesome. What about practical steps? We have a GC who's stepping into their first management role. Congrats.
Yeah.
What are the best kind of open-minded ways to lean into, all of this and really kind of hit the ground running, and setting up your own values? Karla, do you have any suggestions?
I think, and I said this, leadership is an inside job first. So I think really taking that time to identify and reflect on what your leadership point of view is. I had, the benefit and privilege to work for a leadership company for almost over a decade, and taught me a lot. And I'm so blessed, and I'm a better person having worked there. But, it's servant leadership. In what way am I there to serve the people that I lead and have the privilege to lead versus the other way around? and authentically getting my own ego out of the way and really trying to optimize and empower, the people that, that are on my team. And one, strategy framework, I'm a big believer in frameworks, just, helps, craft an ability to hold ideas against a framework and measure, but it's ARC, autonomy, relatedness, competency. And Daniel Pink had reframed it and used different words, but at the end of the day, this is 50-year-old research. If you give people autonomy, get out of the way to let them do their job. Relatedness, give them meaningful work that they actually care about and tie it to something higher level, even if it's tactical. But that's why you need to have team goals, individual goals, organizational goals. They all need to align. And competency, are you giving that person the ability to really optimize mastery in that subject? And for me as a leader, if I can do those three things, ARC, then it's up to that person to really optimize the opportunity. And that's why I always say, is it a can or a won't do? And, ongoing weekly, quarterly conversations where you check in, are you getting what you need to be successful here? What outside the team is getting in your way? Because might be another functional leader, sales leaders, sales sometimes in legal have this, this friction. In what way can I lean in and help kind of break down that barrier, and that's where that advocacy comes in. So I think, I would just encourage, what's your leadership point of view? And also articulate that to your team. Maybe, as if you have a number of team members in one of your first team meetings, or, maybe sometime, 60 days thereafter, I just want to familiarize you this is my leadership point of view. So your people have a sense of who you are and what your expectations are. And hopefully there's alignment, but that would be my recommendation.
I just did a LinkedIn post on this topic, actually, because so it's fresh of mind in terms of, I think generally in the legal field, we do a really bad job of, you don't take management courses in law school, right? Like, I think we do a really bad, before I got to that point, I did have to sit down and think about some of the soft skills and think about, and it's a journey because I didn't wake up and all of a sudden I was this perfect manager. I'm still not there, but some of the things I think about, I take it back to the human level, right? So think about it from a human perspective. Don't just be super metric and result. We got to get to this endpoint or file this motion or do this case or whatever it might be. That will be a piece of it. But from a management perspective, I think like the skills, the things that come to mind that drive me are empathy, acceptance, safety. I think those are things that immediately your team and it might even just be one person, the one person you're managing. If you can make them feel safe, if you can make them feel included, if you can make them feel accepted from a human level, I think all the things Karla talked about are super important as well. But thinking about just the emotional component, that is a big piece of it. And if you think in your own personal lives, how do I feel when I don't feel safe? How do I feel when I don't feel accepted? How do I feel? It doesn't feel that great, right? So your employees, your team are going to want the same thing. So what can you do to help foster that? And some of the things I do, and like I said, management is a journey. We're always figuring things out. Is share a bit of myself, right? If I'm having a hard day, my team usually knows it. If I've got kids that are sick, if I've got, husbands traveling, whatever it might be, I think share a little bit of yourself because that encourages others to share. And it also just incorporates then, a culture of safety where they can then be transparent and they want to share and talk about deeper things beyond just the surface value. So you might then foster some real conversations about what they're really thinking about. But I think it starts at very human components of how can you relate to that person? How can you make them feel safe so that you can share a bit of yourself and they can share?
Some strategies, and I think that's so on point in terms of the emotional aspect. People come to work and spend a lot of time, give you a lot of their time. And certainly with the pandemic, there's just been more stress and more work to do in general, domestically, professionally, strategies you might want to think about, what's an inspiring tip of the week? Mm-hmm. I would do video vignettes of my daughter, hey, XYZ legal team, I just want you to have a great week. It showed me as a human, it showed that I valued their families because I value mine. So, I think when people feel like they can be humans at work, and the pandemic, for all of the challenges that we have, we've been in each other's living rooms and bedrooms for almost, 2.5+ years. And, the work environment is different. And as such, leaning in as a leader, it does look different. One learning moment I had, I was trying to give an award or recognition to a team member, and it was like a Starbucks card. I thought it was like a nice gesture. Well, they didn't drink coffee. So it was like a lesson for me. Have I done
it this way? Lots of coffee, drinking over here.
Am I doing what I need to be doing to know how they feel honored and acknowledged? Maybe it's not a $50 coffee card. It's another 2 hours off on a Friday so they can go to spend more time with their family. So I think really taking the time, even when you're super busy, take the time. And that's where those weekly check-ins really, I think, are very important. Lead with, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Then get into tactical, the work part of it. But I think the people part is so important.
Yeah.
Know the names of their significant other, know their kids' names, know their dog's name. I've got some on my team, some on my directs. Their dog's the most important thing in their life. And I love that, make sure that you ask how that's going. And similar to what Karla just said, don't jump into the, hey, this deadline is on Wednesday. Are you going to meet it? Or, hey, you were supposed to send me this. Like, you can get to those things, and that's a part of the conversation. But lead with the, how was your weekend? Hey, I know you weren't feeling well. I know your significant other tested positive. Are they doing okay, with COVID, those types of things, and making sure that you care about them at a human level. First and foremost, because that's, if you don't have that at a management to employee relationship, it's not going to go anywhere good.
Right.
One of the most important relationship, if not the most important relationship at an organization, is between the manager and the person they lead. And people don't leave companies. Sometimes they do. They leave bad managers.
They do.
And that's, that at the end of the day, like there's so much evidence that demonstrates that. And whether you call it the great resignation, the great recalibration, however you want to frame it, leadership really matters.
I say that all the time. Yeah, I came to Uber initially for the mission, and I still love the mission of the company, and I love the company, but I've stayed for my manager and I've stayed for my team. It's the people that will keep you there at the end of the day. And if that's not working, and if you're sitting here listening to this and it's not working for you, then you probably have your answer of, maybe it's time for something else.
Yep. Thank you guys for the time. Everybody, it's resonated so well with our audience, and everyone's so appreciative and wants to work for you both. So I'd love to know, closing remarks, we only have a few minutes. Are we optimistic of the future? Where is that pay gap going? Yeah. And I could.
I think we have to be, right? I've got a daughter. I've got to be optimistic. There's no, for her, if nothing else, right? And as I mentioned, I've got a team of mostly female individuals. So we've got to be optimistic. And I think talking about it in the way we're talking about it now would not have happened probably even 10 years ago, honestly. There is a tidal wave coming, and it's changing. And so I'm excited about that. I think we're not where we need to be. We've got work to do, but I'd rather be optimistic about it than not.
I think there's no other choice but optimism. One thing too is I'm starting to see male advocacy, like in LinkedIn, and also, I don't know if you're familiar with Eve Rodsky, but she wrote a book called Fair Play, and they just put it into a documentary. And it's all about what is happening at home to ensure equity, because regardless of your significant other relation, if there's not a 50% split at home, it's really hard to really lean in professionally. So there's a real need to shift domestic responsibility equity to allow that person to really lean in and optimize their professional, objectives. And I'm seeing more of that in terms of coming from male voices, not just female voices. And I think that's very encouraging. And so, I would encourage, read the book, watch the documentary in your spheres of influence of whatever nature, lean in, be an influencer, to have the conversation. And I think that's where, some courage and you know, kind of speak your truth, is be the voice of change. I think that's really important too.
Absolutely. You guys are amazing. Thank you again for the time. We will definitely share kind of a highlight of everything that we spoke about today. We're looking forward to staying in touch. And everybody in the audience, if you have continued lingering questions, do feel free to let us know, and we will relay it to Maureen and Karla.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Okay, have a great week. Take care.
Okay,
bye.